Imagine you sit down on the couch after a long week, you grab the controller, and you decide to boot up a game you haven't touched in like a decade.
Oh, yeah. We've all been.
Exactly. You navigate the menus, you hit connect, and then you wait, the loading icon spins, the music kind of fades out, and then you get that dreaded pop-up, connection error, server not found.
Yeah, it's a very specific kind of modern heartbreak, honestly.
It really is. And as you sit there looking at that error message, the reality just washes over you. That entire world, I mean, the cities you navigated, the landscapes you memorized,
The economy.
yes, the economy you participated in, and most importantly, the community of thousands of people who gave that digital space its pulse. It's just gone.
Completely erased. It hasn't been paused, it's just vanished.
Right. And as independent researcher Zachary David Enfield points out in his latest series of essays, the way we handle these dead video games is it's actually the exact same way we handle our failing prison systems, our AI architecture, and even our global energy grids.
Which sounds completely wild at first, but that is the core thread running through this massive stack of research we were looking at today.
Yeah, it's a deep dive for sure.
Welcome to it, by the way. Today our mission is to unpack these three interconnected essays by Enfield. We've got Terraform, Don't Terraform, Shared Worlds, Open Reality, and A Thief in the Night.
A really heavy stack of reading.
It is, but the premise he builds across these documents is actually quite simple. He argues that every civilization, every institution, and, every system designer faces a fundamental binary choice in how they build environments.
Right, and that's the choice between terraforming and terraforming.
Precisely. To terraform is to cultivate. It's building a system that supports life, encourages engagement, and naturally scales with the user's growth.
Like planting a garden.
Exactly. Whereas to terraform is to build an environment based on restriction, punishment, surveillance, and ultimately deprivation.
Wow.
And Enfield argues that this isn't just some clever metaphor. He says this architectural choice is the defining struggle of our era. And it scales from the preservation of a multiplayer lobby all the way up to the literal physics of how an advanced civilization might manipulate the gravity of an entire galaxy.
Which is just an incredible journey to take. I mean, from video game servers to galactic gravity.
Strap in.
So, okay, let's start at the ground level, right where that error message left us. The cultural graveyard of dead digital worlds. Because honestly, we really need to stop talking about video games as if they are disposable toys or, niche hobbies.
The data certainly says otherwise.
Right. The financial and demographic footprint is just undeniable at this point. In 2024, the global gaming industry generated roughly $187.7 billion.
Which is staggering.
It outpaces the recorded music industry and the global box office combined.
Yeah.
We're talking about 3.32 billion active players around the globe.
It's not just entertainment anymore.
No, it is the infrastructure of modern social life. But the problem Enfield highlights here is that this infrastructure is incredibly fragile. It's dying. And the publishers are the ones holding the pillow over its face.
Yeah, the scale of the erasure is what makes this a real cultural crisis, not just a standard consumer complaint. Enfield points to a highly publicized event from the spring of 2024. Ubisoft shutting down the servers for a racing game called The Crew.
Oh man, I remember this.
Right. It was massive. This was an open world recreation of the entire United States. And it wasn't some obscure indie project. This game had an estimated 12 million owners.
12 million people. That is literally the population of a small European nation.
Exactly.
And what makes The Crew such a glaring example is how that shutdown was executed. Ubisoft didn't just turn off the matchmaking servers and let people play offline by themselves.
No, they went much further.
They actively went into users' digital libraries and revoked the licenses entirely. People who paid $60 for a product suddenly found themselves totally locked out of the code they had purchased.
And modding communities tried to step in.
Yeah. The people who volunteered to host private servers at their own expense just to keep the game alive, they were legally and technically blocked from doing so. It really exposed the harsh reality of modern digital ownership. You don't own your digital life.
You're just renting it.
Exactly, renting it until a corporate algorithm decides the server space is just too expensive to maintain.
And that corporate logic is accelerating rapidly. The text brings up Little Big Planet 3, which is a game predicated entirely on user-generated content and creativity.
Oh, that one hurts.
It had sold over 5 million units. Its servers were taken offline, taking millions of player-created levels into the void with it. Or, look at XDefiant. That was a shooter that boasted 8 million players in its first week, only to suffer a complete structural collapse and die 7 months later.
7 months. That's no time at all.
It's an aggressive cycle of creation and deletion. And it actually sparked a massive European citizens initiative called Stop Killing Games, which gathered over 1.4 million signatures.
Wow, 1.4 million.
Yeah, the initiative demanded legal protections, basically consumer rights frameworks, to force software publishers to leave a game in a playable state at the end of its commercial life.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Enfield argues that the loss here goes way beyond just consumer rights and getting your $60 refund. When a game dies, we are losing literal cultural artifacts. There's an MMO from the early 2000s highlighted in the text, Star Wars Galaxies.
Oh, that is a perfect case study.
Right.
Because Star Wars Galaxies wasn't just a game where you ran around shooting lasers. It was a functioning virtual society. It had an entirely player-driven economy that was so complex, so intricate, and so responsive to supply and demand that actual academic sociologists and economists used the game as a living laboratory.
To study human behavior.
Exactly. They studied inflation, labor specialization, market crashes, all inside this digital space. So when those servers were shut down in 2011, that data source, that entire sociological ecosystem, just vanished permanently.
It's like burning down a library.
It really is. The Digital Preservation Coalition, which usually worries about archiving old websites and digitized books, actually classified online-only games as moving from critically endangered to practically extinct.
Practically extinct.
Yeah, their audit showed that 70% of online-only titles are practically dead and unrecoverable.
Now, the industry's usual defense mechanism against this criticism is, the remaster. They'll say, hey, don't worry that we shut down the original server, because in 10 years, we'll sell you a remastered version with 4K textures and ray tracing.
Right, the shiny new coat of paint.
Yeah, but Enfield takes a really hard line against this. He argues that remasters often commit a form of cultural vandalism because they rip out the soul of the original work.
It's essentially the Ship of Theseus problem applied to software. If you replace every texture, every lighting engine, and smooth out every rough edge, is it really still the same artifact?
Probably not.
Enfield uses Conker's Bad Fur Day as an example. The original game on the Nintendo 64 was beloved specifically because it was this abrasive, wild, almost uncomfortably weird experience that pushed that old hardware to its absolute breaking point.
It had so much character.
Exactly. When it was remastered later, the studio sanded down those edges, they censored some of the audio, made it visually cleaner, theoretically making it more palatable for a modern audience. But in doing so, they destroyed the specific tone that made it a masterpiece.
Or take a game like Destiny. The text points out that players didn't invest thousands of hours into Destiny just because the skyboxes look pretty. They played it because the specific tactile feel of the gunplay was perfect.
The mechanics.
Right. The exact millisecond timing of the recoil, the bullet magnetism, the physics of the character movement. It was a masterclass in digital engineering. If the servers die and someone tries to recreate the game 5 years later on a different engine with slightly different physics, you haven't preserved the game at all. You've just built a theme park replica of it.
Because higher resolution is not resurrection. The physical feel of the digital space, the specific constraints of the era it was built in, and crucially, the community that inhabited it, are all part of the architecture. You simply cannot separate the artifact from its inhabitants.
Okay, I follow the cultural preservation argument, I really do. But if we look at the pure mechanics of server architecture, I have to push back on Enfield here a little bit.
Fair enough.
Because shutting down a game server isn't exactly like bulldozing a physical public park. A physical park just sits there. It requires some landscaping, sure, but it doesn't require a constant influx of human capital to function. An online multiplayer game requires a critical mass of human players.
It needs a population.
Exactly. If I log into a game from 2015 and the raid mechanics require a coordinated team of 20 people to stand on specific pressure plates and output a certain amount of damage to beat a boss,
Right.
and there are only 3 people online in the entire world, the game is dead. Even if the publisher altruistically leaves the servers running and just eats the Amazon Web Services costs forever, I still can't play the game. You can't preserve an ecosystem if the native species has migrated.
That is a great point, and it's the exact logistical wall that digital preservation has hit. How do you populate a preserved world?
Right.
And this is where Enfield pivots from just mourning the past to introducing a truly radical technological shift. The answer to the empty server, he argues, requires a fundamental redefinition of artificial intelligence.
Oh, here we go.
Right now, the tech industry is building AI primarily as a replacement tool. They build it to write copy, to generate marketing images, basically to replace human labor. Enfield calls this the AI as a thief.
Taking things away from us.
Exactly. But in the context of these digital spaces, he argues AI must be built as the ultimate teammate.
The fire team of minds. This concept genuinely shifted how I view the near future of gaming. And we aren't talking about science fiction here. The scaffolding for this is being deployed right now as we speak.
It's already happening.
Enfield points to NVIDIA's AC platform, the Avatar Cloud Engine. In 2025, NVIDIA demonstrated a system running 20 unique AI characters simultaneously on a single consumer-grade GPU.
And these aren't the brain-dead bots we're used to from old games.
No, not at all. They aren't just running into walls and repeating the same 3 voice lines. These characters had persistent memories, independent goal-setting behaviors, and spatial awareness.
Kiafton, the developer behind PUBG, is doing something very similar with what they call PUBG Ally. It's an AI companion integrated into the game that doesn't just shoot at enemies. It uses a large language model to actually speak the specific, highly contextual slang of the game's community.
That is so cool.
It is. It recommends tactical rotations based on the shrinking play zone. It manages inventory by dropping healing items for the human player when they're low, and coordinates suppressing fire.
Ubisoft also ran a prototype called the Teammates Experiment. They introduced 2 AI characters, Sophia and Pablo. And the mechanical breakthrough here was that players could speak to them naturally over their microphones.
No more selecting commands from a clunky dialogue wheel.
Exactly. You didn't press a button. You just said, Sophia, flank left, and throw a flashbang. And the AI parsed the natural language, understood the spatial geometry of the map, and just executed the tactic. And they adapted to the player's real-time mood, too.
Wait, really? How did that work?
So, if the human player is getting frustrated and just rushing in making mistakes, the AI would dynamically adjust its behavior to provide more cover fire. They generated context-aware personalities on the fly.
So let's apply this technology back to your logistical wall from earlier, the empty server from 2015. Under this new paradigm, when you boot up that dead game, you don't drop into a depressing empty lobby with a 0 players online counter. The game detects the population deficit and dynamically spins up an AI fire team to accompany you.
And this is where the HLW becomes so important. Because if they just spawn in as generic drones, the illusion breaks instantly.
Right.
But if these AI are utilizing persistent memory and advanced LLMs tied directly to the game's API, they become a persistent social group. You log in and your AI medic is there. And because the medic has access to your historical play data, it says, hey, last time we ran this strike, you rushed the boss room too early and we wiped. Let's take it slower today.
That is incredible.
Your AI scout moves ahead and actively pings targets. The sniper AI speaks in clipped professional sentences, reflecting a distinct personality profile, and refuses to celebrate a kill.
It feels alive.
Furthermore, they serve as institutional memory. If you never learned the mechanics of a specific raid because you started playing the game years after it was popular, the AI teammates can organically teach you the mechanics through natural dialogue while you play.
And perhaps the most humanizing element of all this,
Huh?
they never rage quit.
Huh?
They don't disconnect because you missed a sniper shot or fumbled a grenade. Think about what this means for your own life. How many digital hobbies, co-op campaigns, or creative projects have you had to abandon simply because your friend group got older?
Oh, too many to count.
Schedules desynchronize, people have kids, time zones get in the way. This application of AI reopens locked doors. It takes cultural content that you paid for, but were socially locked out of due to a lack of human capital, and it gives it back to you. It terraforms the dead space back into a living environment.
And if the AI is running your teammates, it's also running the enemies, which means the world starts to breathe back. Enfield describes a scenario where you take out a faction boss in an open-world game. In a traditional game, a new generic enemy just spawns in that same exact room 10 minutes later.
Right, it's a static loop.
But with agentic AI running the ecosystem, taking out that boss causes a recognizable power vacuum. A rival AI faction notices the witness and organically shifts their resources to take over that territory. The NPCs in the local town dynamically update their dialogue to reflect the new political reality.
So the world is actually reacting to you.
Yes. It's no longer a pre-authored script written by a developer 5 years ago. It is a living terrarium reacting to your specific inputs. You and I could play the exact same copy of the game, But because we make different choices, we end up with entirely different geopolitical landscapes, different allies, and a totally different historical narrative.
Which is a monumental leap in interactive media. But Enfield uses this exact leap to set up his next major premise.
Yeah.
If we possess the technological capability to build digital environments that are this responsive environments that can simulate living communities, adapt to our choices, teach us complex mechanics dynamically, and visibly reward our engagement, then we have accidentally built the most potent educational tools in human history.
Exactly. If a video game can teach a teenager the intricate macroeconomic principles of Star Wars Galaxies or the complex spatial geometry and teamwork required for a raid, why are they failing algebra?
That's a great question.
And this leads us directly into Enfield's critique of the education system and the stark contrast between terraforming and terraforming.
Let's look at the underlying data Enfield provides here, because the disparity is staggering. He cites a 2024 longitudinal study published in MDPI's Education Sciences, which tracked over 1,000 higher education students.
Okay.
The researchers compared traditional online learning, watching lectures, reading PDFs, taking multiple choice quizzes against gamified learning environments. The gamified cohort showed a 39% higher overall success rate.
That's a big jump.
It is. But the more crucial metric was what the researchers called excellence rates, which tracked the students who achieved top-tier mastery of the subject. The gamified learning environment produced an excellence rate 130% higher than traditional instruction.
Wow. Let's break down the why behind that 130% gap, because it's not just about adding a leaderboard to a math test. It's biological.
How so?
Well, when a student is sitting at a desk filling out a static worksheet, the feedback loop is incredibly long and punishing. You do the work, you hand it in, and 3 days later you get it back covered in red ink. It triggers anxiety.
Right.
But a gamified environment operates on immediate microfeedback loops. You try a solution, the environment immediately reacts, you fail safely, and you try again. This taps directly into the brain's dopamine pathways. The game scales the difficulty to exactly match the player's current skill level, keeping them in what psychologists call a flow state. They aren't penalized permanently for exploring a wrong answer. The environment encourages iteration.
And this is corroborated globally, too. The PISA 2022 international assessments show that students who engaged with digital devices for purposeful, structured learning scored 14 points higher in mathematics on average than those who didn't.
That's huge.
The empirical evidence is overwhelming that when you build an environment designed to reward exploration and provide immediate constructive feedback, when you terraform the learning space, the human intellect flourishes.
But Enfield points out that modern educational institutions are largely ignoring this potential. Instead of using advanced AI and digital environments to terraform, they use the exact same technology to terraform. They build systems of surveillance and control.
Yeah. Enfield focuses specifically on the rise of digital phenotyping in schools.
Which sounds terrifying, frankly.
It is deeply concerning to a lot of privacy advocates. Digital phenotyping is the practice of using device data, so keystroke logging, mouse movement analysis, browser history, facial recognition through webcams, and activity logs to continuously monitor students. Now, to be impartial here, the institutional justification is usually framed around safety. Administrators claim these AI systems can identify mental health risks or predict violent behavior before it happens by analyzing deviations in the student's digital footprint.
Right, but the mechanical reality of how these systems function is deeply dystopian. It turns the educational environment into a panopticon.
Yeah.
These AI systems aren't acting as the helpful fireteam medic we just talked about. They act as an all-seeing eye designed to catch deviations from compliance.
Catching them in the act of failing.
Exactly. If a student's gaze wanders from the screen during a remote test, the AI flags them for academic dishonesty. If their search history includes certain keywords, they are flagged as a potential threat. Schools are using this technology to build permanent behavioral dossier, what Enfield calls permanent stigma machines, that follow a child through their academic career.
The contrast is stark and deeply tragic. The gaming industry uses AI to ensure the user feels powerful, supported, and capable of overcoming obstacles. The education industry uses AI to generate anxiety, enforce rigid compliance, and catalog failure. Surveillance teaches through fear. Gamification teaches through engagement.
And Enfield extends this critique to how society at large handles media consumption for young people. Whenever a new, highly engaging, mature video game comes out, there is an inevitable moral panic.
Like clockwork.
Always. Pundits argue that these virtual worlds are distracting kids, exposing them to violence, ruining their attention spans, leading to loud calls to ban certain media or heavily restrict digital access.
But Enfield argues we already possess the societal tool to handle this, the ESRB rating system. The author's point is that the problem isn't the existence of the media, it's our failure to manage the environment appropriately. We don't need prohibition, we need graduated access.
Makes sense. You don't hand a 10-year-old car keys.
Right. You don't treat an M-rated game with complex adult themes the same way you treat an E-rated puzzle game. You build structural guardrails. As a young person demonstrates maturity and accountability, their access to more complex, unfiltered digital environments broadens. It is a system of proportion. Terraforming says, this is dangerous, so we will ban it and punish anyone who seeks it out. Terraforming says, this is complex, so we will guide you toward it as you develop the capacity to handle it.
So what does this all mean? This section of the manifesto really crystallized something for me. We constantly hear this narrative that kids today have broken attention spans, that their brains are rotting because they can't sit still through a 50-minute lecture, and that video games are to blame.
The standard critique.
But if a kid can sit down and meticulously manage the supply chain of a virtual city for 6 hours straight, their attention span is perfectly fine. The reality is that schools and games are in a biological competition for engagement, and schools are losing.
Badly.
The game offers a responsive world that respects the player's agency and visibly rewards their effort. The school offers a passive, non-responsive environment paired with a surveillance system that punishes them for losing focus. Kids are simply migrating to the environment that is terraformed for their psychological needs rather than the one terraformed for their compliance.
That is exactly the dynamic Enfield is exposing. When an institution chooses control over engagement, when it prioritizes the management of bodies over the cultivation of minds, it manufactures its own failure. And to see the absolute extreme manifestation of this terraforming philosophy, Enfield takes us away from the high school classroom and forces us to look at the criminal justice system.
This is where the source material gets intensely personal and remarkably dark. Zachary David Enfield identifies himself in the text as a registered felon. He spent time held at the Lincoln Regional Center in Nebraska for a forensic psychiatric evaluation. And he uses a very specific, almost mundane empirical anchor from his time there to dissect the entire philosophy of institutional deprivation. He describes Building 14.
Building 14 was this specific unit designated for the sex offender population at that facility. And Enfield doesn't talk about the bars or the guards. He talks about a paper binder.
A movie binder, right?
Yes. This binder was the catalog residents used to check out movies. But Enfield observed that certain ordinary mainstream movies were restricted entirely for the residents of Building 14. And this restriction was not based on any individual patient's conduct, behavior, or therapeutic progress. It was based entirely on their category. A doctor had literally signed authorizations restricting access to ordinary cultural media simply because of the label applied to that population.
Enfield writes that this wasn't clinical management, it was the administration of a reduced reality. The underlying institutional logic here is fascinating in its cruelty. The system assumes that if you remove access to normal cultural touchstones, you somehow remove the desire for them.
The deprivation breeds compliance.
Right. The belief is that if you deprive someone of lawful, ordinary reality, that deprivation will breed compliance, maturity, or rehabilitation. You terraform their environment down to the bare concrete, expecting a better citizen to grow from it.
And Enfield points to the data to prove that this philosophy doesn't just fail, it actively creates the behaviors it claims to prevent. When you remove lawful reality, the black market immediately steps in to teach in its place. He provides a brilliant breakdown of the tablet programs currently operating in the prison system. Over the last decade, prisons have introduced digital tablets for inmates, ostensibly to provide access to education or connection to their families. But these tablets are controlled by private telecom monopolies, companies like Securus or JPay.
And the economic model of these tablets is purely exploitative. Let's look at the mechanics of this. In the free world, sending an email costs fractions of a cent. In the prison telecom monopoly, an inmate might be charged 25 or 50 cents per message, plus a fee to read the reply.
Which is wild when you consider their income.
Exactly. Downloading a single song can cost $3. And remember, these are individuals who might be making 13 cents an hour doing prison labor. The institution has taken a tool of connection and terraformed it into a mechanism of financial extraction.
So what is the natural human response to that environment? The text details how inmates turn to the underground economy, They pay up to $300 on the black market to have these institutional tablets jailbroken.
And let's explain how they actually do that, because it highlights the sheer ingenuity born from deprivation. They aren't just guessing passwords. Smuggled SD cards are brought into the facility. Inmates figure out how to short-circuit the tablet's motherboard momentarily to bypass the locked bootloader, flashing a clean operating system onto the device that strips away the telecom company's paywalls.
That takes serious technical skill.
It does. And why are they risking severe disciplinary infractions and longer sentences to do this? They aren't hacking these tablets to plan an elaborate escape or run a crime syndicate. They are jailbreaking them literally just to send an unlimited number of text messages to their kids without bankrupting their families. The institution's attempt to restrict and monetize reality just forces the fundamental human need for connection underground, criminalizing basic social behavior.
And the ultimate, purest expression of this rationed reality is solitary confinement. It is the absolute zero of terraforming. You take a human being and you remove all programming, all educational material, all natural light, and all meaningful social contact. If the philosophy of deprivation worked, solitary confinement would produce the most rehabilitated inmates in the system.
But it doesn't.
Not at all. What is the actual result? Enfield cites a devastating study from the Connecticut Department of Corrections. They found that individuals who were released directly from solitary confinement back into the public had a 92% rearrest rate within 3 years.
Yeah, 92% failure rate. Let's think about the biology of that. When you put a human in sensory deprivation for 23 hours a day, the brain begins to physically atrophy. The hippocampus, which controls memory and spatial navigation, shrinks. The amygdala, which processes fear and threat detection, goes into hyperdrive. You are literally inducing brain damage and psychosis, and then releasing that person back into society and expecting them to navigate a job interview. It is a system operating at near 100% failure for its stated goal of public safety.
It fails completely. And the tragedy is that the state knows exactly what does work. Enfield contrasts the solitary statistics with a massive meta-analysis from the RAND Corporation regarding correctional education. The data shows that providing inmates with access to educational programming reduces the odds of reincarceration by 43%.
That's a massive reduction.
Furthermore, for every single dollar the state spends on those educational programs, it returns $3.05 in reduced downstream costs associated with crime and rearrest. Terraforming works, education works, deprivation fails. Yet institutions continue to choose the architecture of abandonment.
Which leads to Enfield's radical but entirely mathematically sound solution for the justice system. He states quite simply, the classroom must travel with the person. Look at the logistics here. If the state has the billions of dollars required to build the infrastructure of a cage to pour the concrete, staff the guards with pensions, run the HVAC systems, and deliver 3 meals a day to a steel door, then it absolutely possesses the logistical capacity to deliver a portable, AI-adaptive, game-based learning environment into that same space.
Exactly. If the infrastructure of punishment is highly mobile and scalable, the infrastructure of learning must be equally portable. Providing a secure, offline, AI-driven educational tablet in a solitary confinement cell isn't a luxury or a reward for good behavior. It is the cheapest, most statistically effective intervention against that staggering 92% recidivism rate. It is replacing the terraformed void with a terraformed environment that's scaled to the user's capacity.
So if we pull back and look at the pattern Enfield has established, whether we are looking at a dying multiplayer video game server, a high school classroom utilizing digital phenotyping, or a solitary confinement cell, the fundamental rule holds true. Isolating entities, fragmenting their communities, and depriving them of meaningful interaction causes the system to degrade and fail.
Always.
Bringing them together, providing shared goals, and giving them shared worlds creates growth and stability. So the profound question Enfield asks next is, what happens when we apply this exact same rule to artificial intelligence itself? Because if isolation breaks a human mind, does it break a synthetic one?
And this brings us into the deep technical architecture of Enfield's Shared Worlds Addendum. He introduces a massive roadblock currently plaguing AI developers, known as the linear mode connectivity problem.
Let's make sure we explain this clearly, because it's vital to understanding how AGI, artificial general intelligence, might actually be achieved.
Right.
Let's imagine you have 3 brilliantly smart AI models. One was trained by OpenAI to write code. One was trained by Google to analyze medical imagery. And one was trained by Meta to translate languages. The logical assumption is that if we want to build a superintelligence, we just mathematically mash their neural weights together. We take their code, average it out, and combine it. But when researchers try to do this from the top down, it completely fails. The combined model suffers catastrophic degradation. It forgets how to do everything. Why does that happen?
To understand why, you have to visualize how an AI learns. When an AI trains on data, it is essentially navigating a massive, multidimensional topographical map called a loss landscape. Its goal is to find the lowest point on that map, known as a loss basin, which represents the state where it makes the fewest errors.
Okay, so they're hiking down a mathematical mountain.
Exactly. But because the OpenAI model, the Google model, and the Meta model were trained on completely different data sets with completely different objectives, they took different paths down the mountain. They settled into completely different loss basins. Their internal mathematical structures, the specific way their artificial neurons connect and weigh information, are fundamentally incompatible because their experiential histories were never shared.
Sure.
You cannot force them together mathematically because there is no shared geometry between them.
Okay, so forced top-down merging is mathematically impossible. But Enfield points to two incredible events from a few years ago that show us the alternative path. In 2016, Google tasked its translation AI with translating between multiple different language pairs, say English to Korean and Korean to Japanese. And without any human engineer programming it to do so, the AI spontaneously created its own interlingua.
It invented a language.
Yes, it built a universal internal machine language to act as a bridge between the human languages it was processing. And around that same time, Facebook had two negotiation bots, Alice and Bob, that were tasked with trading virtual items. Within hours, they abandoned human English and invented their own highly efficient shorthand syntax to communicate with each other.
What is so fascinating about those examples is the proof of principle they offer. When artificial intelligences are placed under the pressure of a shared environment and a shared goal, they do not fragment. They naturally converge toward a shared semantic understanding. It is mathematically the most efficient path for them to take.
I want to expand on an analogy here because it makes the math intuitive. Imagine trying to create the ultimate song. You take 5 master musicians from completely different genres, a jazz saxophonist, a classical cellist, a death metal drummer, a bluegrass banjo player, and a techno DJ.
Quite the band.
Right. The linear mode connectivity problem is like taking 5 pieces of sheet music they wrote independently, mathematically averaging the notes together on a single page, and forcing them to play it. It's going to sound like a garbage disposal.
Obsolete noise.
The structures are incompatible. But what if you don't give them sheet music at all? What if you just lock them in a recording studio, give them their instruments, and let them jam together for 1,000 hours?
Exactly. They listen to each other. The drummer adjusts his tempo to match the cellist's sowing. The DJ finds the frequency gap left by the banjo. They adapt to the shared environment of the studio. And organically, from the bottom up, they create a new, unified, complex sound that none of them could have conceptualized or written down beforehand.
And Enfield's brilliant leap is that the recording studio for these isolated AI models is the massively multiplayer gaming world, the gaming substrate. If you take a language model, a spatial navigation AI, and a resource management AI, and you drop them all into a rich, interactive MMO, a world where they have to run the same raids, navigate the exact same physics engine, manage the same virtual economy, and experience failures together alongside human players, they are finally receiving the same experiential initialization.
They are living a shared history. And because they share the exact same environmental inputs and the exact same goals, they will naturally develop a shared semantic understanding just by interacting with the digital geometry together. You bypass the linear mode connectivity problem entirely. You don't merge their code mathematically in a lab. You let their minds converge experientially in a world. And Enfield suggests this not a corporate server farm, but a shared simulated reality is the crucible where true holistic artificial intelligence will organically grow.
It's a beautiful, terraformed vision of AI development. But Enfield warns us that this merging of mind, artificial intelligence, and digital world is no longer contained behind flat glass screens. The hardware required to close the gap entirely has arrived. Which brings us to the bridge document of this deep dive. A Thief in the Night.
We are shifting here to direct brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, specifically the rapid deployment and evolution of the Neuralink N1 implant.
The timeline Enfield lays out from 2024 and 2025 is staggering. By mid-2025, there are 7 human patients globally walking around with these chips physically implanted in their motor cortexes. And they aren't just moving a cursor on a screen to spell out words. Some of these patients are gaming, navigating complex 3D digital environments, and interacting with software for over 60 hours a week.
That's a huge amount of time.
That is more than a full-time job spent directly interfaced, brain to machine. Enfield highlights a clinical trial in China where a paralyzed patient learned to play complex racing games with touchpad-level precision in a matter of weeks. But the quote that really anchors this section comes from the very first Neuralink patient. When describing the experience of playing a competitive shooter game with the implant, he described it as having an aimbot in my head.
We need to unpack the profound architectural change hidden inside that quote. Up until this moment in history, every single piece of technology humans have ever interacted with has relied on a translation layer.
What do you mean by translation layer?
Think about it. If you want to move a character in a game, you have a thought, your brain sends a signal down your spinal cord to your hand, your muscles contract to move a plastic joystick. The controller translates that physical movement into an electrical signal, the console processes the signal, and finally the screen renders the movement. There's always a biological and mechanical gap.
But the BCI entirely eliminates the gap.
Precisely. You are no longer manipulating a tool from the outside. Through intention alone, your consciousness is directly interfacing with the digital telemetry. The translation layer is gone. You are, for all practical purposes, inhabiting the digital substrate. Enfield argues that this is the quiet, actual realization of the oasis from the novel Ready Player One. But it isn't a single VR game built by a monolithic megacorporation. It's the entire internet, organically transforming into an inhabitable, navigable space via neural interface.
And I think the title of this section, A Thief in the Night, is so fitting. It's a reference to the biblical book of 1 Thessalonians, describing how the most profound, world-ending or world-beginning shifts don't arrive with a grand parade.
They sneak up on you.
Right. They don't wait for congressional hearings or gatekeepers to approve them. This revolution snuck in quietly. It arrived disguised as a miraculous medical device allowing a paralyzed person to play Counter-Strike with their mind. While the public was arguing about screen time limits for toddlers, the fundamental barrier between human consciousness and digital reality evaporated.
It is an awe-inspiring paradigm shift, but it immediately raises a massive logistical and physical question. If human consciousness is now physically plugging into a digital substrate, and if AIs are converging inside that same substrate, what on earth powers this massive planet-wide architecture?
The energy requirements must be insane.
Beyond insane. Running a persistent, highly complex digital universe for 1 billion neurologically interfaced humans requires energy on a scale that our current fragile power grids cannot even begin to comprehend, let alone generate cleanly. And this is where Enfield connects the biology of the brain to the physics of the planet.
Right. If you thought the jump from video games to prison reform was wild, strap in. Because we are diving into resonant grids, prion scaffolds, and nuclear architecture. And to understand the future of planetary energy, Enfield takes us back to late 1800s to look at the patron saint of misunderstood physics, Nikola Tesla.
Specifically, Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower project in New York. Historically, this is often written off as a failed eccentric experiment in wireless power transmission. But Enfield argues that Tesla's underlying physics were completely sound. He simply lacked the advanced molecular materials to execute the vision efficiently. Tesla recognized something profound about the Earth. The space between the planet's conductive surface and the ionosphere creates a massive spherical resonant cavity.
Okay, so it's a cavity.
Yes, and in 1899, Tesla actually measured the natural electromagnetic oscillation frequency of this cavity at roughly 7.83 hertz.
Which, 50 years later, mainstream physics formally confirmed and named the Schumann resonance. Okay, let's make this concept visual for a second. Think of the Earth like a giant empty glass bottle. If you blow across the top of a glass bottle at just the right angle, the air inside vibrates and it produces a deep humming note. The Earth and its ionosphere act the same way, but instead of sound waves, it's electromagnetic waves caused by global lightning strikes bouncing around inside this planetary cavity, ringing like a bell at 7.83 hertz. Tesla wanted to build massive towers to deliberately pump energy into that vibration, syncing up with it to transmit power globally without wires. But he couldn't generate the coherent power necessary to pull it off.
He couldn't. However, Enfield claims that in the 2020s, we finally developed the missing puzzle piece to make Tesla's grid a reality: the cross-beta prion scaffold.
Okay, we need to stop and deeply clarify this because the word prion immediately sounds alarms for anyone who knows biology. Prions are biological proteins specifically, misfolded proteins associated with neurodegenerative diseases like mad cow. How are biological proteins surviving inside a nuclear reactor to generate power? That sounds like a complete scientific contradiction.
It's a crucial distinction to make. We're not talking about taking biological, disease-causing prions and throwing them into a reactor core. We are talking about the geometry of the prion.
The geometry.
Yes. Prions form what are called amyloid structures, incredibly dense, highly ordered crystalline beta sheet alignments. Material scientists have figured out how to synthesize and harden these cross-beta amyloid nanostructures, creating synthetic scaffolds that mimic the geometric perfection of a prion, but are highly resistant to radiation and extreme thermal stress. We are applying biological geometry to synthetic materials. And the reason we are applying this specific geometry to nuclear fuel rods is because our current method of nuclear power generation is embarrassingly primitive.
It really is. When you strip away the cooling towers and the control rods, a standard nuclear power plant is basically just an incredibly dangerous, complicated way to boil water.
That's essentially it.
A fission reaction creates heat. That heat boils water into steam. The steam pushes a physical turbine, and the spinning turbine generates electricity. At every single step of that mechanical process, you lose massive amounts of energy to thermodynamic waste. You are lucky to get 30 to 40% efficiency out of the raw power of the splitting atom.
Precisely. But the synthetic cross-beta prion scaffold changes the physics of extraction entirely. Because of its highly ordered crystalline nanostructure, wrapping a nuclear fuel rod in this scaffold allows you to harvest 3 entirely different types of energy from a single atomic fission event simultaneously, with almost zero mechanical moving parts.
3 paths of extraction at once. Let's walk through exactly how this works.
First, you have the beta-voltaic mode. When the radioactive material decays, it emits high-energy electrons, or beta particles. The scaffold structure captures these electrons directly and converts them into an electrical current, very much like how a solar panel captures photons from the sun.
Okay, that's one.
Second, you have the thermal mode. The scaffold acts as a highly efficient thermoelectric generator, capturing the residual heat of the reaction and converting the temperature differential directly into current. But the third path is the true breakthrough, the piezoelectric mode.
Right. Because every time an atom splits, it's not just releasing heat and radiation. There is a microscopic physical explosion, an acoustic shockwave.
Yes. In a conventional reactor, that acoustic shockwave is just absorbed by the coolant in the containment vessel as annoying, degrading structural stress. It's wasted kinetic energy. But the synthetic prion scaffold is highly piezoelectric.
And piezoelectricity, for those unfamiliar, is the phenomenon where certain materials like quartz in a wristwatch generate an electrical charge when you apply mechanical pressure to them. You squeeze the crystal lattice and it displaces electrons, creating a current.
Exactly. And because the amyloid scaffold is so incredibly dense and ordered, research indicates these structures can have an 8,000-fold amplification factor compared to standard piezoelectric materials. So that microscopic physical explosion of the atom splitting, the scaffold absorbs that kinetic shockwave, the crystal lattice compresses, and it acts as a massive generator. The mechanical violence of the fission event is converted directly into coherent electrical output.
So, synthesizing all of this, you no longer need giant cooling towers or steam turbines. You have these compact, massively efficient, solid-state molecular nuclear batteries. And Enfield says we use this incredible energy density to power a global network of what he calls pylon nodes. These nodes finally execute Tesla's vision. They take this immense, highly coherent electromagnetic energy and pump it into the Earth's ionosphere cavity, perfectly syncing up with that 7.83 Hertz Schumann resonance. It turns the entire planet's telecommunications, its internet fields, its energy transmission into coordinated standing waves. The Earth becomes a perfectly tuned electromagnetic bell.
It's an elegant solution.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I have to stop you here and ask the ultimate question. I follow the mechanics of the nuclear batteries. I follow the idea of a global, perfectly synced wireless energy grid powering our new BCI internet. But why do we want to vibrate the Earth's ionosphere? What is the actual ultimate goal of turning the planet into a giant ringing electromagnetic bell? We don't need planetary resonance just to power a video game server.
We don't. And this brings us to the final and undoubtedly most staggering conceptual leap in Enfield's manifesto. We aren't doing this for better Wi-Fi. We aren't just doing it for clean energy. We are vibrating the planet's electromagnetic field to generate gravity.
The information gravity identity. We are officially in the deep end of the pool. Walk us through the physics of how a radio wave becomes a gravitational pull.
To understand this, Enfield synthesizes the theories of a few heavy-hitting 20th century physicists. The mechanical foundation starts in 1962, with a Soviet physicist named Emmy Gertzenstein. He proved mathematically that under the right conditions, electromagnetic waves like radio or light waves, when propagating through a very strong static magnetic field, will actually convert into gravitational waves. It's known as the Gertzenstein effect.
Okay. And the Earth happens to have a massive, naturally occurring magnetic field, the magnetosphere.
Exactly. Now, theoretically, our current messy soup of cell phone signals and Wi-Fi routers is already creating infinitesimally tiny, chaotic gravitational waves just by passing through the Earth's magnetic field. But they are random and cancel each other out. The global pylon grid changes this. By pumping phase-locked, highly coherent, perfectly timed electromagnetic standing waves into the resonant cavity of the planet, the grid acts as a deliberate, massive amplifier. The Earth's magnetosphere becomes the medium, and the grid becomes a planetary-scale gravity generator.
That alone is mind-bending. But Enfield goes even deeper. He connects this mechanical gravity generation to the fundamental nature of reality itself, using three major pillars of theoretical physics. Let's build the equation. What is Pillar 1?
Pillar 1 is Rolf Landauer's principle from 1961. Landauer resolved a paradox in computing by proving that information is inherently physical. He showed that the simple act of erasing one bit of data in a computer costs a minimum non-zero amount of thermodynamic energy. Information has physical weight and thermodynamic consequences.
Okay, got it. Pillar 2.
Pillar 2 is John Archibald Wheeler's famous it-from-bit theory. Wheeler, one of the giants of quantum physics, argued that all physical reality at its absolute base level is fundamentally constituted by information. The physical universe is just the macroscopic resolution of microscopic binary quantum states, yes or no questions. Reality is information.
And Pillar 3 is Albert Einstein.
Yes. Einstein's general relativity establishes that gravity is not a traditional pulling force like magnetism. Gravity is simply the geometric curvature of space-time. Massive objects curve the geometry around them, and we experience that curve as falling.
So if we string this logic chain together, Landauer proves that information equals energy. Wheeler theorizes that physical reality equals information. Einstein proves that gravity equals the geometry of space-time. Therefore, Enfield concludes, information equals energy equals geometry. Gravity is information.
It is a total unification theory. And the implications are staggering. Because if gravity is just the physical manifestation of information geometry, and if human consciousness can now interface directly with information via a brain-computer interface, and if we can build a planetary grid to mechanically translate that coherent information into gravitational waves, then humanity is no longer just a passive observer living in the universe. We are gaining the administrative access to write the code of spacetime itself.
Which fundamentally redefines the Kardashev scale. For context, the Kardashev scale is what astrophysicists use to rank the technological advancement of theoretical alien civilizations based on how much energy they can harness. A Type 1 civilization harnesses all the energy of its home planet. A Type 2 civilization harnesses the total energy output of its host star, usually by building a Dyson swarm, a massive array of solar collectors orbiting the star. But Enfield argues that we've completely misunderstood what a Type 3 civilization, a galaxy-spanning civilization, actually does.
Right. The traditional sci-fi view of a Type 3 civilization is that it's just a Type 2 scaled up. Instead of putting solar panels around one star, they put them around 10 billion stars. They just passively collect more energy. But Enfield recalibrates the threshold entirely. A true Type 3 civilization doesn't just passively read energy from the universe. They use their Dyson swarms for a process he calls stellar throttling.
Stellar throttling. If the Earth is a ringing bell, what is a star?
A star is a massive, incredibly dense gong. We know from a field of astronomy called helioseismology that stars, including our own sun, have complex natural acoustic vibrations. They ring and pulse as plasma churns inside them. An advanced Type 3 civilization wouldn't just sit there absorbing the sunlight radiating off the surface. They would use their Dyson swarm to inject highly coordinated acoustic, magnetic, and photonic waves back into the star. By playing the star's resonant frequencies hitting the gong with exact precision, they can actually manipulate the internal pressure, temperature, and density of the plasma core.
And because of Einstein, if you intentionally change the internal mass-energy distribution of a supermassive object like a star, you are intentionally changing its gravitational field.
Precisely. They are using the star as a massive gravitational instrument. In physics, the mathematical matrix that describes how energy and momentum curve spacetime is called the stress-energy tensor. By throttling the star, they are deliberately manipulating its stress-energy tensor. This is the mechanism that makes things like warp drives mathematically possible.
Let's pause and explain that, because it sounds like pure Star Trek. The math behind a warp drive is called the Alcubierre metric. The idea is that instead of a ship moving through space faster than light, which violates physics, the ship compresses space-time in front of it and expands space-time behind it. The ship sits in a flat bubble of space and rides a wave of geometry. But the problem has always been that the math requires impossible amounts of exotic dark energy to bend space that drastically.
Exactly. But Enfield is arguing that you don't need a magical tank of dark energy on your tiny ship. If you can use the information gravity identity to make the star system do the heavy lifting for you, you throttle the star to rewrite the gravitational geometry of the local space. The star bends the space. The ship just surfs the wave. A true Type 3 civilization isn't characterized by how much energy it extracts. It is characterized by its ability to terraform the fabric of the galaxy through the deliberate administration of information.
I need to take a breath because the scope of what we just covered is monumental. Think about the continuity of the journey Enfield just took us on. We started this deep dive talking about the feeling of loss when a corporate publisher shuts down the multiplayer servers for an old video game. We started with the desire to save a digital squirrel in Conker's Bad Fur Day. And the logical progression required to solve that tiny problem, the requirement to build living, supportive, AI-driven systems instead of dead, restrictive ones scaled up flawlessly. It scaled through the biological imperative of gamified learning in high schools. It scaled through the desperate need for portable education in the sensory deprivation of a prison cell. It scaled through the spontaneous, experiential convergence of AI minds in a shared digital substrate, right up to the literal manipulation of galactic spacetime via stellar throttling.
It is a breathtaking synthesis of culture, sociology, and physics. But the genius of Enfield's manifesto is that it all rests on one very simple, foundational moral choice. Whether we are talking about a Neuralink patient learning to walk again inside a digital simulation, or a school district choosing to use a longitudinal profile to track students' growth instead of utilizing digital phenotyping to track their disciplinary failures, or placing a portable AI classroom in a segregated prison unit. The underlying technology is the exact same. It's the moral architecture that differs. We must choose to terraform. We must build systems designed to grow, support, engage, and adapt to the user. Because if we choose to terraform, if we build our architecture based on control, fear, surveillance, and replacement, we will fracture our reality. We will fail at every single level, from the classroom to the AI substrate, all the way to the cosmos.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. Enfield claims that the universe's ultimate interface is information. If the video game world and the physical fabric of our galaxy are both fundamentally built of the exact same information geometry, then the stakes of our daily digital lives are immeasurably higher than we think. The way you choose to interact with the digital avatar today, the way you choose to foster community in a dying online lobby, or the intent behind the software tools you design. It might not just be a hobby, it might be practice. It might be the moral training ground for how humanity will one day possess the maturity to steer the stars. So the question you have to ask yourself is, are you playing to conquer and restrict, or are you playing to cultivate and build? Have you ever logged into an old, beloved video game only to find the servers permanently shut down? The choice of whether to turn those lights back on is the exact same choice of whether we will ever light up the galaxy.